Okay, I'm starting finally. Jesus. All right, so I was having some issues with OBS, which is the streaming software, and sometimes it just drives me crazy. So hopefully, if you're watching this, let me know if you can hear me, and let me know where you're watching from. And yeah, I'm gonna do this. I've been doing a lot of streams actually lately on not on this channel, my main channel. I'm on my main channel, right? But on my other channel, my Magic Adam channel, and yeah, they've been fun. A lot of good sessions have come out of it, and I'm gonna try to do them. I think more on this channel. Oh, great! Thank you, Lucas, for letting me know that you can, and Nicholas from Oklahoma. Yeah, welcome, guys, and glad that people are here from the beginning. Maybe you guys attempted to read Illuminations, or maybe didn't. Either way, welcome. And yeah, I was just saying that they're these streams have been fun. I'd like to do them more on this channel as well. I just need some more ideas. I don't think I want to do books because, I mean, I read, but I read a lot of. I don't read. Don't tend to read novels, and I don't tend to read front to back. So I'm looking for um, more topics. Okay, so you guys are all over. You got Lucas in Italy and Gustavo in Portugal. Welcome, everyone. And if anyone managed to make it through the book I actually finished just last night, and I'm going to yeah, go through every story and kind of dissect it. No worries if you didn't read it. Yeah, um, this will be just kind of a review, and I'll try and avoid major spoilers. I'm just going to give like a a brief overview and synopsis of the stories without going into too much detail. So I think overall, my overall impression of this, as somebody who's read most of Alan Moore's works, certainly all the major works, is that I'm not too excited about this book. I mean, there were a few stories that I kind of liked, but by and large, I was not super thrilled with the book. And of the three books that he's read, I mean that he's written, the three prose books, Voice of the Fire, Jerusalem, and this one, I would say Voice of the Fire is still my favorite of those three, and I would say Jerusalem is still the worst, and this is somewhere in between those. And I think anyone who reads this book, though, is going to come away with the impression that more than anything, it's a very diverse collection. Um, it covers stories that were written from the 1980s up to 2021, so it's a very broad range of things. Oh, hey, Alan. And yeah, so it's a broad range of stories. And if this is your first time reading Alan Moore, I would not suggest starting here by any means. Overall, I think I've been much happier with his comics than his prose. But Voice of the Fire was the kind of the standout prose book that I've read by him. And yeah, so I'm just going to dissect each of the stories without giving any spoilers, and let you know it's a pretty good sized book, about 500 pages, and the largest story in the collection, which is really a novella that could have been published as a novel, a short novel, is the What We Can Know About Thunderman story. And all the other stories are really diverse. Yeah, so it doesn't seem like most of you have read the book, which is great. That's no problem, like, because it just came out last month, and I realized, yeah, whatever reason, that's cool. People just want a review to find out if it's worth reading, and I'll do that, and I'll let you know which ones I think are the best stories. That maybe if you just want to go for the really best ones. And yeah, before I go on, let me see what else I can mention. So um, I do have two other channels. Feel free to subscribe to those. My music channel and my magic channel. And the magic channel is the one where I've been doing live streams about, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a week. So if you want more live streams, I'm going to try and do them on this channel as well. But um, yeah, I just need topics, I guess. I'm trying to think of topics to bring to this channel that are going to be relevant to this audience. I'm thinking maybe the next time I do, because I still want to do James Joyce videos, and my Finnegan's Wake series I've kind of neglected. So if I bring that back to this channel, I'm gonna start doing those live probably. That way, maybe it'll be more like a James Joyce roundtable. That'd be fun. Maybe movies or something like that. So if anyone has any ideas, feel free to let me know. Also, I don't think I've ever mentioned, not once on this channel, that I do uh, like kind of, well, I started them as tarot readings, but now I do kind of life coachings and whatever. So yeah, if anyone's curious about that, where's my link for that? I do them on SuperPeer. Here's a 15% off coupon if you want to contact me for life coaching or whatever. Some ways I think it's kind of ridiculous that I do them because I don't know, but I mean I'm good at a lot of things. I do life coaching on. Well, I have a list. Go look at the list. But mainly, what I'm kind of trying to gravitate towards more is kind of content creation and growing a channel and things like that. So, anyways, Alan says, I want to get more from Hell graphic novel. Yeah, actually, I would say, Alan, I think you would like From Hell. That'd be a great place. If you've never read Alan Moore, From Hell is a good place to start. There's two editions now. There's the black and white edition that originally was published, and the color edition. I haven't read the color edition. So at some point, because it's been a long time since I've read From Hell, I would love to reread that. Maybe I should do that. That'd be a great live stream. Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you, Alan, for that inspiration. From Hell live stream. That's kind of a different, I think I picked this one because it's current and it's still kind of, yeah, I think Lucas chimes in as well. Yeah, From Hell's a masterpiece. Actually, yeah, Live Finnegan's Wake as well. That's a good idea. I was going to say, though, with From Hell, particularly, I think, Alan, you might like it because that was really when I think Alan Moore was discovering or rediscovering, I don't know, he was really getting into Robert Anton Wilson. So there's a lot about conspiracies and a lot about things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of endnotes you can read in that, but just the main body of I don't know if I'll reread the endnotes. I'll probably just skim those, but I would love to reread From Hell. I should do that, read the color version. It is certainly one of his best. I think if you've never read Alan Moore, maybe my suggestions for starting are, let me turn off my annoying ad, are From Hell. Watchmen, of course, is a pretty good place to start. I think the first two volumes of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen are pretty great, although the whole series is worth reading, and I'll say more about that with connection to Jerusalem at some point soon. I'm really going slow on this live stream, so I'll probably be on quite a while today. So anyways, yeah, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. What else would I recommend as starting for more? If you want prose, Voice of the Fire, and he's done a lot of audio recordings. I don't know if people recognize that, but The Birth Call is probably the one I like the most. And oh yeah, I saw you did that. Yeah, I would love to reread Illuminatus too. Alan's talking about the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Anton Wilson, which, yeah, like I'm going to talk a little too about this weird. I've talked about it before, but this weird overlap between Grant Morrison and Alan Moore, how they have these strange parallels, and how I think they're kind of like these connected forces that are united. So Alan says that you met Raw a couple of times in Tempe. I remember you saying that, yeah. And there's, I think, certainly Moore and Morrison are both heirs to Robert Anton Wilson. And in terms of this dynamic of them paralleling each other and doing similar things, when Alan Moore was doing From Hell, that's the same time that really Grant Morrison was doing The Invisibles, which are, and both of those are about conspiracies in some ways, and both were heavily influenced by Robert Anton Wilson. So yeah, that's just a weird parallel, but I'm not going to go too into that tonight. I think I should probably get started on talking about Illuminations, because otherwise I'm going to be here forever. And I woke up like a half hour ago, and it's like 10 o'clock where I am, 10:30, and yeah, I haven't had breakfast or anything. So I just woke up, did my hair, and yeah, got on this live stream. So made some tea, but I'm still pretty sleepy. So let's get cracking, shall we? I made text. I made titles to let you know which story I'm on. So we're gonna begin with Hypothetical Lizard, which is, if I remember correct, it's one of the oldest stories in the collection. And let me crack it open on my Kindle. So yeah, Hypothetical Lizard is sort of a science fiction-y fantasy story, and I, at this point in the collection, Hypothetical Lizard, which I think he wrote in 1987 as part of this shared universe. And you have to realize in 1987, Alan Moore was really starting to come into his own. Swamp Thing, Watchmen were, I don't remember when Watchmen started. It was about then, but if he hadn't started it, he would be starting it soon. So he was still, the idea of him doing, though, like some shared universe story with anthology is just kind of weird nowadays, but maybe he would do something like that. Um, Anyways, the story is kind of about this, and you have to realize I read it like a month ago, so I'm kind of a little vague on some parts of this book, but it's kind of like about this. There's like a prostitute, and it was kind of confusing in some parts because I guess there's some like trans issues in which, so the genders and the pronouns became a little confusing at parts, and that kind of threw me off just because I was like trying to keep track of who was who. And yeah, I think with this one, I always, with a book, I always want to enjoy it, and always want to get into it, but um, at some point in this story, like I liked parts of it, but other parts I just kind of got lost, and I wasn't really on board with it. It just didn't feel effective. So I think this is the point when, I think when with a novel, if it's like dragging on, you either have to decide if you're gonna jump ship or just force yourself to keep reading. But with the great thing about short stories is they're short, so if you're not into them, you can always just move on to the next one. And this was not too long, so I have to say though I wasn't too into Hypothetical Lizard. Maybe though it's the kind of story that if you reread it, it would make more sense. Some of the names, you know how sometimes in fantasy novels they do these character names that are just like Rothpin Proth or something. They're just like, can't you just call him Gary or Melissa or something, regular names? So I wasn't totally on board with all the names, and yeah. So, anyways, I'm gonna move on from this one because it wasn't really doing much for me. The next story after Hypothetical Lizard was, was Not Even Legend. Not Even Legend. And Not Even Legend, I don't remember. Okay, I do remember. Not Even Legend was, it felt like an experiment that wasn't quite a complete story. It felt like an idea for a story, and why am I not going there? Okay. Yeah, it felt like when it ended, and it was a pretty short story, it was like, oh, that's the end of the story. I did not see that coming as the end of the story at all. So something my one of my literature or essay writing professors once told me that um, about an essay, like sometimes you need to unpack it. This Not Even Legend felt like it needed to be unpacked more, and it just didn't feel, it felt like more like the notes for a story rather than a story itself. So I think when I finished that one, I'm like, okay, I'm not totally getting or enjoying all these stories, and I was, that's always kind of disappointing when you reach that moment in a book when you're like, you realize that you're not enjoying it, and you have to like make a decision. I continued because I was doing this live stream, and I've liked enough of more. I mean, I've liked a lot of more that I wanted to see what else was in the book. But I was just kind of like, these are certainly very diverse stories, but I'm not really getting these. So, next story, let's jump on. Location, location, location. If I'm remembering correctly, let me make sure this is the right story. Mm, which story was this? Uh, oh, okay, I remember this story. Okay, so this story was fantasy as well, and it was um, it was kind of in the vein of something like that I would expect from Neil Gaiman, in which there's kind of like a Christian mythology system behind it, and but it's told in a very kind of Douglas Adamsy sort of whimsical. This is actually realism sort of way, and some of the dialogue and characterization didn't feel very. I wasn't very on board with it, but it was easy enough to read and easy enough to follow. Um, I have to say though, what I'm getting in a lot of Morse writing and prose is that he does kind of things that where he uses a lot of adjectives and he explains things in a very kind of flowery, overwritten way that I'm not always on board with. Um, I think that happens when you write in one medium for a long time. And if you watch my video about not Alan Moore, about Grant Morrison's novel Luda, which came out a couple months ago, I had like a similar issue. I think when you write in comics for so long, you don't have to describe situations. You don't have to describe and say like who's talking. You don't have to say things. You just show them, and then really all your writing is in the dialogue. And with comics, you have to keep every word counts because you want to keep those dialogue balloons from ballooning. And I think with the unrestrained, vast cornfields of the blank page in which you can write as long and as much as you want, it sometimes is a little a little overwhelming for a writer in which they feel like they could just go on and on. And Moore is a very poetic dude. He can be very poetic, but sometimes I think in short stories and in prose in general, you want to be a little more Raymond Chandler, a little more clean cut, and keep things simple. But so I was getting with this location story. It's a fantasy about kind of the end of the world, and I'm not going to give away too much, but one of the characters is basically um, a major biblical character, and I won't go into it goes into this kind of like a erotic vein, and overall, it just wasn't. It didn't feel very realistic, not realistic, but I mean, even when you do fantasy, you have to have some degree of realism to make it seem like a story that people can relate to. So, anyways, I'm gonna move on to that one. That one wasn't really doing much for me either. Next story though was cold reading. Cold reading is, I think, a story that I can kind of relate to because it's told first person from this guy who's a psychic. And if you watch my magic channel, that's my deal. So I do tarot readings over there. But this story actually, I think, was one of the better stories because what it reminded me of was those old EC comics where there was kind of a twist at the end, and you kind of had to go back to see how it was building up and where it was going to. It had a lot of suspense. It was kind of a typical trope in Moore is to have a character often think they know what is going on, only to have it be revealed that that is not what was going on at all. And there was one thing in this story in which a character recalls something early on in his childhood that later surfaces in his life in a very, I thought it was a very clever way, and it made me like you hardly remember it when you actually read it, and then it flares up later on. So I thought this was one of the better crafted stories in terms of dynamics. The thing about those old EC stories is that sometimes, they were sometimes they could be kind of a gimmick in which at the end of it, it was like, oh, I got it. And then you would never have to read it again. I think Moore kind of improved upon that in that he does have one little element, this element from his childhood that inexplicably arrives in the story that he doesn't quite provide an answer. And this is, I know Moore is a pretty big James Joyce fan, as am I. And that's kind of something that Joyce did in his short stories with the epiphanies. He would have a character realize something, and he would have kind of not a mystery, but an impression revealed in which something happens in which you're not quite given a clear answer. You're instead given a question, and you're left with that question. And I think Moore does that. So I think Cold Reading would have to be one of my choices for one of the better stories in this collection. Okay, moving on. Okay, so the next story is the improbably complex high energy state. And this is very much a fantasy in terms of what it is, because it's sort of the first early moments of the universe. I see, Lucas, you're suggesting for my next video on this channel, the Sigla of Finnegan's Wake. I may do that. Maybe I think I'm thinking about doing something related to Finnegan's Wake, so that could be well be. I don't know if I have that one as an ebook or a PDF. I'm gonna look and see what I have. I have quite a few Finnegan's Wake books that I haven't gotten to, and I think with the Finnegan's Wake channel, that's sort of the next step, is to, rather than read into the book, read a book about Finnegan's Wake and then talk about that as a leading into Finnegan's Wake. So I may well do that. Back to the improbably complex high energy state. This book is, this short story was very, sorry, I always interrupt myself. I should just keep going, but I love to respond to people. So, Evelyn's Epiphany and Dubliners, Alan's talking about. And the book is a good starting point, says Lucas. Yeah, okay. I shall look into those. Either Finnegan's Wake or From Hell. I thought about doing a movie too. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the story, and then I'll jump back to the comments. Feel free to comment. I'm just gonna keep going though, because I think for people that aren't watching this live, they're like, "What is going on?" So anyways, this story, I don't know if any of you have read Flatland. Actually, I don't know if I've read Flatland. I feel like I have, but maybe I haven't. It's a story about like these characters that are like two-dimensional characters, and they somehow interact with and realize that there's a third dimension, and they're like squares and lines and stuff. But this story, the improbably complex high energy state, was kind of like that, in that it's these first few moments of the universe, like right after the Big Bang, in which this moment of Moore is certainly he reads New Scientist, which is a science magazine that I also read. It's probably my favorite magazine, and so he's well aware of the basic developments on the cutting edge of physics and all that, and he sort of uses that as a way to create these. He also talks a lot about what's it called? It's a term that I had kind of heard, but I wasn't too familiar. Oh, a Boltzmann brain, which you can read about it, and I'm not sure I totally understand the concept of a Boltzmann brain, but it's the concept that I'm probably getting this totally wrong, but it's the concept that in a universe where everything has some probability of happening, there's a probability of the universe just kind of coughing forth a functional brain at some point. And you can read the Wikipedia article about it. I think that's probably a better way to understand the Boltzmann brain. But this story, though, I thought it was kind of a clever idea, and he kind of takes these these concepts of things like quarks and um, string theory and all these other concepts that are out there, and turns them into relatable characters as characters with identities. And so I think this was one of the most interesting setups in the story. I don't know if it always works, but I enjoyed this one, and I thought it was one of the better stories. So yeah, like who would have thought that a moment in the universe when there aren't really characters, he somehow creates characters on them and does some unique things. I thought it was kind of a fun story, so I think that was one of the better ones. All right, I'm going to move on to the next story. And before I do that, let me look at the comments, because I see you guys are commenting. So let's see. Alan met Roland McHugh. Fascinating. He was the guy that did the Finnegan's Wake annotations, if I remember correctly. I don't no longer have that book, but I just remember the font on that cover was very jagged, and I could see Roland McHugh, unless I'm misremembering. It's true, Alan. You've met everybody, haven't you? 58. So you probably haven't met James Joyce. You were probably you're too young to have been alive when James Joyce was alive, alas. But I think if you had been alive, maybe you met him in a dream or something at some point. Um, yeah. I don't know about. Do you guys ever meet like famous people or authors or even dead people in dreams? Because that happens to me sometimes, and I'm trying to remember. I feel like as I was reading Illuminations, not the story in the collection, but the collection itself in the last month, I feel like Alan Moore showed up in one of my dreams, but I could be misremembering that. I've certainly encountered a lot of. I don't know if I've ever encountered Joyce in a dream, James Joyce, but certainly encountered a lot of famous people in dreams. Interesting, you guys. Yeah, if you guys have any dream encounters or astral plane encounters, I'm curious who you've encountered. Who have you met on the astral plane, Alan? I haven't met Pynchon, alas. I think he would be somebody if I could encounter in a dream or at some plane of existence. It'd be Pynchon, because he's certainly somebody that really got me interested in the occult, and he brings it up in a lot of his books, but especially Gravity's Rainbow, I think. All right, let's move on to Illuminations, and then feel free to keep commenting, you guys, and I'll come back and check in. But Illuminations, according to the notes in this collection, Alan Moore says at the end that this was inspired, I think, by a seaside trip to the beach in 2005 with his wife Melinda Gebbie, who I'll mention later on with the story about San Francisco, because Melinda Gebbie is Alan Moore's wife, and she was a major contributor to the alternative comic scene, and definitely with the women's the voice of women in comics. She's a major figure, and she is from San Francisco. So I'm getting ahead of myself. So anyways, they married at some point. I don't remember when. I want to say like 2007, 2008. And but I guess this story, they did like a seaside trip to a nearby English town, and so this story is kind of a lot of autobiographical elements, I think, and it's very very nonfiction based. Like it feels like more like a travelogue or a journal. And I was gonna say, I don't feel like Alan Moore travels a lot. I feel like he's a very I just imagine him at home with like thousands of books, surrounded by thousands of books, smoking some like Gandalf pipe, and typing or maybe writing with a quill in like some novel, and then sending it off to somebody to type up. I don't know, but that's my image of him, and I don't feel like he's traveled a lot. I know when he was really starting to break into comics and with DC, I'm pretty sure he visited New York. I'm pretty sure he visited San Diego at some point. I know he met Jack Kirby, and because I've seen a picture of them together, and So I know he's been to at least San Diego and New York, but beyond that, I don't know of where he's traveled. My impression is that he has not traveled much, but I could be totally wrong. Maybe in his younger days he did. But anyways, as this story, this just feels like a kind of somebody traveling against their will to some seaside town and not really enjoying it. So this story didn't really do much for me. But yeah, that's all I have to really say about Illuminations. Let's move on. Oh, okay, so now we're getting to the largest story in the book, which is, where is it? Where to go? Oh, what we can know about Thunderman. Before that, let me look at your comments, you guys. So, memories of Dublin, yes. Last time I went to Dublin was 2018, I believe. I did not make it there on this journey through Europe, but I hope to make it there at some point again. I've never been there for Bloomsday, and I got to make it there for Bloomsday. You met Pope Wojtyla. I don't know who that is. Glenn Gould. You met Glenn Gould, the pianist. Oh, in dreams. Okay, I didn't finish the sentence. That's funny. I was like, you met Glenn Gould. That's pretty impressive. I would love to meet Glenn Gould. Blixa Bargeld. I don't know who that is. I don't know who Pope Wojtyla and Blixa Bargeld are, but let me know. I'll Google them after this. But Alan says he has lucid dreams of this library, and I'm trying to find this book. I don't know what particular book, but the Dewey Decimal number is 770. You got to look up. Tell me what the Dewey Decimal 770 is. What is that? What section is that? Because I'd like to know what book it is. Alan, I have to ask you: have you ever read Jorge Luis Borges? Because he has at least one story about a library that, if you haven't read, it's a great. I mean, Borges is one of the great writers in general. Certainly one of the greatest short story writers. Yeah, if you haven't read Borges, Alan, you got to read Borges because you'd love him. And I think, let me mention this too. As I was reading in the last month, as I was reading Illuminations, I was re-listening to 3 novels by, I think he's my favorite living novelist. Aside from Pynchon, I think Mark Lehner is easily my favorite living novelist, in which I just get so excited by his books. And the last 3 books he read, The Sugar Frosted Nutsack, Gone with the Mind, and The Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit, which for some reason was republished with a different title, but basically I think of it as Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit. All 3 of those books are if you like Finnegan's Wake and if you like Joyce, I highly recommend those books, because I re-listened to them, and they're great as audiobooks too. And if your library has them in the audiobooks, just find them on Libby. You can find them, and that's kind of the same place that I read New Scientist magazine. So use your library for all these. But if you like Alan Moore, if you like James Joyce, if you like Pynchon, and if you like books, just read. Or if you like Borges, check out Mark Lehner, because he's amazing. His books just blow my mind, and I think he's kind of a more accessible Finnegan's Wake. He's more easy to read, and yeah. So, anyways, where was I going? So, Alan, you talk about this library. Oh yeah, let me know what 770 is. Do you have a YouTube channel, Lucas? Good question. Let us know. I have some stuff, mostly old, on a channel called Hydre in Time. Okay. But you don't use it regularly. I think everybody, Alan has a great YouTube channel for books. If you like books, check out his book channel. It's called Big Hard Books and Classics, which is a great title. It always cracks me up. And he talks about Joyce. He talks about Pynchon. A lot of authors that I don't know but I want to read. Like he's mentioned, I believe her name is Clarice Lispector. Is that her name, Alan? I every time I see you do a book review about her, I'm like, oh, I got to read this woman. She sounds amazing. I want to read her in Portuguese, but my Portuguese is not quite there yet. So anyways, I'm ignorant about Borges, alas. have to read. Yeah, Alan, you got to read Borges. You got to read Mark Lehner. Um, Borges, just start with like his complete fictions. I think it's called Ficciones, the complete collection of all his short stories. They're incredible stories because he does things in short stories that are so different from any other author, and he really incredible stuff. My Spanish is getting to the point where I can read pretty good. I just haven't attempted any fiction in Spanish, but I read nonfiction in Spanish, no problem. So I want to reread and read all of Borges in Spanish because he's one of those authors that I would love to read front to back everything he's ever written because he's written about Joyce. He's written about a lot of great literature. So yeah, Borges is incredible. Let's see. See, Lucas, he vouches for me on Borges. I use Libby a lot. Yeah, use Libby, use your library because I found all three of Mark Lehner's last three novels. Like I said, Sugar Frosted Nutsack, which is in its own ways, it's like a Finnegan's Wake. Gone with the Mind, which is the caveat I'll mention about Gone with the Mind that you have to recognize the first hour of that audiobook or the first, I don't know, 30 pages of that book, they weren't really written by Mark Lehner. They were written by Mark Lehner's mother, or maybe he interviewed her and he just kind of transcribed it, but it's not Mark Lehner. So if you're not, just understand with that one, the first hour of the audiobook or the first 30 pages of the prose book are not in the style of Mark Lehner. They're in a very different style. And then when it switches to Mark Lehner, you'll know because he has such a amazing voice. And I love Gone with the Mind. It's a great book. It's sort of a memoir, but it's I mean, all of his books are memoirs. And it's a great place to start, but also Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit is a great place to start. I'm so in awe, and whenever Mark Lehner has a new book, I'll rush to get that thing because I will I'll be so excited to read that. It's incredible. So, anyways, I'll take a look at your channel, Alan. Yeah, go check it out. And Clarice Lispector. Yeah, I think she writes in Portuguese, I want to say. So I'm always prefer, if I can, to read in the original language. Yeah, Lehner. Let me spell it out because I know I'm not. For anyone not familiar with Mark Lehner, I feel like he's such an underappreciated author, and the more I'll like with Pynchon and Joyce, I'll shout his name from the rooftops and get people to read him because I want to encourage his endeavors and get him as much support as possible. He deserves all the attention he can get. So Lorenzo Peirani, good to meet you. Or I think he's talking to Alan, but I'll assume he's talking to me and pretend anyways. So so I think I'm caught up on comments. I think I've said all I've wanted to say about that. So let's jump ahead back to this Alan Moore collection with what we can know about Thunderman. And as always, keep talking, you guys, and I'll check in again with you. I think that seems to be the format with this. I'm still kind of, I've only been doing these live streams for a few weeks, so I'm still kind of getting into the process. I like that at this point, I don't know if I'll ever blow up, but if at this point, when people comment, I like that I can kind of comment and keep up with the comments if I want to. But some live streams you watch and the comments are just like floating by, and there's no way you can keep up with that. But I can do that, and I as much as I want a larger audience, and I haven't used this channel very much lately, but I would like to grow it as well. But I've been working on growing my magic channel and trying to get that monetized because I have to get 4,000 hours within a year, the last year. And anyways, boring details. Anyways, back to Thunderman. What we can know about Thunderman. So this collection, this novella, which is very long. It could have been published as like probably 150, 200 page novel. It's about the comics industry, which Alan Moore has, if you know, Alan Moore has thoroughly washed his hands and thrown away the comic industry. And yet he still finds that he has to do this book about it, or this short story about it, novella, because he's clearly thinking about it a lot. And he was, if you don't know Alan Moore's trajectory through comics, he started with like smaller publishers, British publishers, doing short stories and things like 2000 AD and a lot of things like that. And then he kind of broke into comics in the American scene with DC, with Swamp Thing, and then Watchmen, of course. And Watchmen is sort of still the book for which he's most well known, the book which he's most, it's read in college courses. It's on like Time's 100 Greatest Novels. It's certainly a great book. I've read it several times. It's very dark, but it's it's what he's most well known for. But since then, he's done other superheroes, but more and more it was parodies or homages, like things like 1963, Supreme, Tom Strong was kind of a superhero, things like that. So he's done plenty of superhero stories, but he's kind of moved more and more away from that. But he's also still can't get away from it completely because he's oh, I see, Lucas, you mentioned Captain Britain. That is one of the few Moore books that I have not read, I don't believe. I want to say Alan Davis was the artist on that, which Alan Davis is an incredible artist. But yeah, I should read Captain Britain. I think I've read Marvel Man, or Miracle Man, or whatever you want to call it. It's been published under different titles because of, Marvel Comics. Anyways, so I don't think I finished it though, because I wasn't really into that. I have to say I'm not a big fan of some of his works, like Swamp Thing. I'm not a big fan of. But anyways, the point is, Alan Moore worked with a lot of major publishers. He did. I don't know if people know this, but he wrote Star Wars, several Star Wars stories. I haven't read those yet, and I would love to read those at some point. Maybe I'll do a live stream about that, Alan Moore Star Wars. So he's done a lot of major. He wrote Superman stories. He wrote Batman stories. He's been involved with a lot of these major titles, but at some point he just started to become more and more disgusted with mainstream comics and the comics industry as a whole, and he started to do more independent things like From Hell, like what are some other examples? I mean, he owns the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with Kevin O'Neill. Oh, by the way, I haven't mentioned this. Kevin O'Neill died in the last month, which is, I mean, he had retired, so we weren't going to get any more art out of him anyways, but Kevin O'Neill's art is so great, and I love his art on the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. He was the main artist on the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I cannot imagine that book without him. Like, he was such an essential part of that book. And he also did Cinema Purgatorio, which was interesting, with Alan Moore. And of the recent books that Moore has done in comics, I've still enjoyed those. Like, I enjoyed Cinema Purgatorio. I enjoyed the last volume of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. So it's not that I'm not on board with Moore. I still like a lot of his stuff, but I think his prose is not as good as his comics. I'm still much a bigger fan of his comics. So, but this Thunderman story was a dissection of both the superhero mythologies and the comics industry. And this, again, is one of those eerie parallels, because a lot of this reminded me of Grant Morrison's work in Super Gods, which is a nonfiction book. And they kind of do similar things where Grant Morrison watched through all these old Batman and Superman movies to really dissect them. Moore does that with Superman and Thunderman. Thunderman is essentially Superman, and maybe a bit of Captain Marvel, Shazam, with the thunder on his chest. But this is kind of something he's done before, where he's taken superheroes and changed their names and so on. And it's pretty obvious who's who is Stan Lee in this, who is Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and Bob Kane shows up, and Jack Kirby, of course. And there were some characters I wasn't totally clear who he was trying to make, but for the most part, I feel like I understood who was who. And the overall trajectory of the comics industry and most industries is that basically, yeah, the corporations extract as much from as they can from the artists and bleed the artists dry and take their rights and don't leave them with anything, and then make millions or billions out of their franchises and their movies. So Moore is obviously very acidic about that and just kind of tears the industry apart. But also conventions, which I know Moore has been to some conventions, especially in the 80s, but I'm pretty sure he avoids them like the plague nowadays. And I saw when this Illuminations book was coming out that Moore was going to be making appearances at a few comic conventions in the United States, and I don't know, I was kind of confused. I'm like, is Alan Moore going to be getting on a plane and traveling to Miami and Wisconsin for these book festivals or conventions? It did not seem likely, but the news outlet that I read the info from seemed to think that he was, but I was very, very dubious or skeptical about that happening. And it turned out that no, he did not travel. He's been pretty much in isolation since COVID, mainly with, his wife and not seeing a lot of people as far as I understand. So no, he did not visit. He did not get on a plane, certainly. I doubt he will ever get on a plane again and travel to the US or anywhere. Um, yeah, but he did that at one point when he was still kind of breaking in and making it in the comics industry. So this Thunderman story approaches the comics industry from a lot of different angles. Some of it was quite funny, and there's like an interview, there's fanzines, and all kinds of things. Um, I enjoyed this one. It was one of the better stories in this collection, I think. Sometimes it wasn't always there. It could have been maybe cleaned up a little, but I thought it was very interesting. And I think though, if you're not familiar with the comics industry, I have been to several conventions. I've been to Comic Con in San Diego. I've been to WonderCon twice in San Francisco. Those are the only three big conventions I've been to, though. And I think I'm kind of like Moore, and I have no interest in the comics industry and visiting comic conventions. They just don't interest me. And the people there are just, yeah, he takes apart that culture quite well, and convention culture in general is something that doesn't interest me. So I highly doubt I'll ever go to a big convention again. But I'm not a comic pro. I'm just this guy. So anyways, yeah, I think the Thunderman story is probably the most notorious one that we've been hearing about from this collection, because it really does tear apart the comics industry and all that goes on in that. It is a very cannibalistic and incestuous culture, if you want to describe the culture like that. But yeah, it was an interesting book. I mean, interesting collection, interesting short story. That's what I was trying to say. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one, American Light. But before I do that, let me check in with your comments, you guys. Captain Britain, really good early Alan Moore, yes. And Alan Davis is definitely the artist. Okay, the first chapters are naive, but then it grows to an epic. All right, I would like to read that. Yeah, I should. Let me write that down. I don't know. I think if I do live streams, I probably wouldn't do one on Captain Britain because I feel like that's way too niche. But I feel like From Hell is a good idea for a live stream because that's much more well known. It's one of Moore's most famous works, and it's really good. And it's I'm not saying Captain Britain isn't. I don't know yet, but I feel like nobody knows what Captain Britain is. It's not. It's way too. Oh, cool. Alan You went to the Comic Con in Oregon. Nice. I have not. Yeah, I wasn't aware that Oregon had a Comic Con, but I mean, I know they do have conventions, and I haven't been to Portland since I want to say 2006 or seven. It's been a long, long time. I would love to visit Portland. I have several friends up in Oregon, so it'd be good. If I'm ever there, Alan, I'll look you up, and we can do a book review or something. That'd be fun. But I don't know when I'll next be in Oregon or the United States. But yeah, conventions can be fun. I think the smaller the convention, the better it usually is. That's been my experience. But I don't know when I'll next be to a convention. I'm glad they are happening again, and I feel like I like the idea of a convention. I just feel like maybe a comic convention is not the thing for me, but there's other ideas for conventions. Um, all right, so I'm going to move on to American Light and Appreciation. So this one is quite a bit to unpack. So this is really, well, the form of this, let me describe the form. So it's a poem, a fairly long poem, told as if it were written by a beat author. And I think it was supposed to have been published in 1979. And it's, as far as I know, I couldn't figure out a specific beat author that it was supposed to be like imitating. It could just be like a beat author. And I did notice though there's a lot of authors, characters in the beat scene that were mentioned, like, of course, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and a lot of others. But William Burroughs, I don't think he shows up. And I was saying, could this be William Burroughs? And I think, no, this could not be William Burroughs. The voice does not sound anything like Burroughs, and Burroughs did not really write poems. He wrote prose, and they're very poetic prose. But so I think this is just supposed to be a generic beat author as the stand-in. But then on top of that poem, there's this editor, C.F. Bird, who provides an introduction and provides a lot of notes. And within the notes, from the notes, emerges this this kind of secret story and this sort of backstory that the editor seems to be piecing together. And this really reminded me of Pale Fire, which is one of my favorite books. Pale Fire is a long poem, much longer than this. It's a book-length poem in which, oh, actually, no, it's not a book-length poem. It's a long poem, though. I want to say like 999 either stanzas or 999 lines, probably lines. And then there's a long series of annotations by this editor who probably the author did not want to be the editor. If you haven't read Pale Fire, go check out Pale Fire, because I mentioned it many times on this channel, and I need to reread a lot of Nabokov, because Pale Fire, I think, is the best Nabokov that I've read, even better than Lolita. So this American Light reminded me of that, in that there's an editor just like kind of dissecting the poem and adding a lot of info about how he views the backstory of this poem. So anyways, that's the kind of conceit of the poem and this story, if you want to call it a story. And kind of the hidden, sorry, my eyes are itching. The hidden idea is that this other, and I don't think this is a spoiler, because this one doesn't really have spoilers. I'm not really giving anything away. I'm just kind of helping you piece it together. Is that, okay, this more established beat poet, received a manuscript from kind of an aspiring writer and another poet, and somehow he either lost or he burnt the writer's manuscript. And when the writer came back to him and said, hey, what'd you think of the story of the poem? What'd you think of it? Can I get it back? He said, oh, did I have that? Did you give that to me? He pretended he didn't have it when in fact he burned it, apparently. And then the younger writer was so distraught because he didn't have another copy, and he killed himself. That's kind of like the conceit of this poem. So, and the structure of the poem is this ambulation through San Francisco, and there's a lot of, as far as I know, Alan Moore has never been to San Francisco, so I'm pretty sure he's just using Melinda Gebbie, who I mentioned before is his wife and grew up in San Francisco, or is from San Francisco, and knows it well. And I lived in San Francisco for many years, I think 15 years off and on. And this was a very, I knew all these places very well. Like I could follow the map through the city in my head. Just, there were only two places I had to look up. And so I think it was kind of interesting, but as a story and as something that to interest me, I wasn't totally that interested in it. I guess I wasn't really feeling it. And Moore has done things with the beats before. If any of you have read The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, in the third collection, The Black Dossier, there is a section done in the style of Jack Kerouac, but for the most part in the League, he doesn't change character names, but for whatever legal reasons, he had to change the name of Sal Paradise to, I don't know if he changed the spelling or if he did something to change it slightly so that he wouldn't get sued by Jack Kerouac's estate. And so he's certainly an enthusiast, or at least read a lot about the beats. And I know more. I mean, I know. Yeah, he's well acquainted with the beat scene, and for whatever reason, he wanted to do this poem in the style of the beats. And but at the same time, he's also critical of a lot of things about the beats. He talks about this incident, which I wasn't aware of, between Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassady, in which I want to say Neil Cassady used some other woman to steal money from his wife's bank account, and then when his wife found out, I don't know, there was a suicide involved. It mirrors the events in American Light, in that kind of some character or some person was abused in some way financially, and then that led to a suicide, and then Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassady kind of brushed it aside, and when the police were involved, they said they didn't know her or something like that. So that's my understanding of the situation. So I'd never heard that story, because I've never really read any biographies of any of the beat characters. I mean, I've read a lot of Kerouac and Burroughs and Ginsberg, but beyond that, I haven't read much about them. So it was there were some interesting points about it, and he makes some good ideas about how, the beats were kind of open to a lot of things like homosexuality and other things like that. But on the other hand, they could also kind of sideline women. They could also sideline some other minority groups that weren't necessarily part of their agenda. And that's kind of understandable in a sense that pluralistic value structures don't tend to emerge in vast jumps. They don't just go from unenlightened, self-conscious, kind of power structures, in which selfish power structures, they don't jump from that to, okay, everybody has rights, it tends to be much more incremental. So I'm not, you can look at any literary historical figure, and you can look at Shakespeare and find attitudes that you may not agree with, and that may not always jibe with our modern sensibilities of what is fair and right. And that's part of literary analysis. You can only expect so much of the past. So obviously we love if they were at a higher standard of behavior and conceptions, but that isn't always possible. And anyways, so I think with this story, or this poem, that Moore is kind of both praising. This is something he does a lot with his pastiches, and Moore is really known as a pastiche artist, kind of like Joyce in some sense, that he'll take these scenarios, and he'll admire them in a sense, but at the same time he'll criticize them, and he never does a one-sided view of things. He obviously grew up on Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko comics and Superman comics and loves that stuff, but at the same time he's also critical of it and exposes the limitations that come with the form, and he does that here as well. So American Light and Appreciation really navigates through San Francisco and the beat scene, but at the same time it also is, with the footnotes, he's really critical of it as well. So I didn't really like this one. I can't say I was really too excited about it, but I applaud the effort, and I applaud, like I said, this is a very diverse collection of stories. And after whatever story was before this, the Thunderman story, this was quite a jump in style. Like, all these are very different stories. So if you're not digging one, just wait for the next one. I'm going to move on now to the last story. Okay, and I'll check in with you guys. So the last story is called "And at Last, Just to Be Done with Silence." Okay, so Alan recommends going to Powell's City of Books. I've been, Powell is, if you go to San Francisco, if you go to Portland, you have to go to Powell's. It's a huge bookstore. It's a staple there. I think the only book I ever bought there was, what's it called? I'm blanking on the name. Fat Gargantua and Pantagruel, the Rabelais book, which I wasn't able to finish because that's one of those books I've always wanted to read, and I've attempted, but I read it in English translation. I think I'm going to hold off. At some point, my French will be good enough, and I'll attempt it in French. But because I know Rabelais had some kind of an influence on Joyce, but I feel like I've heard two different things, that Joyce hadn't read Rabelais, or that he only discovered Rabelais later on after he had already read Finnegan's Wake. But I know Rabelais does a lot of things that are similar to Joyce in that. How did this talking about pals suddenly turn into this tangent going on about Rabelais? But anyways, in Finnegan's Wake, in Ulysses, there are these lists. That's kind of one of the things that starts showing up, is these long lists of like character names. He'll just go on, and you're like, what is the end of this sentence? What does this mean? He'll just go on. And I think, from what I understand, he kind of gets that from Rabelais, who has these long lists. And the idea that a list can be part of a story is something that I think Joyce steals from Rabelais. But anyways, back to, Powell's books. You gotta check out Powell's books if you're ever in Portland. American Light sounds very interesting indeed. Yeah, I mean, if I had known more about the beat, I mean, I know a lot about the beat scene. Like, I've read most of Kerouac, I've read most of Burroughs, I've read a lot of Allen Ginsberg's major poems. I've read a lot of even some of the minor, lesser known poets in the beat scene, and I like a lot of it. And but I think there's something about, how do I explain this? So in Jerusalem, Alan Moore's second novel, he does a pastiche of Finnegan's Wake. So, but I'm not recommending it. I'm not recommending Jerusalem. I did not like Jerusalem overall. And it's a very long book with a lot of sections that I think are very bad. But he does a pastiche of Finnegan's Wake, and I think it doesn't succeed the same way that American Light doesn't succeed, in that it feels like an after the fact look at something rather than in the moment. Like Finnegan's Wake feels like it still has a lot to offer, and a lot of to be discovered in it, whereas Moore's attempt to recreate that doesn't work. And so I feel like that's what I see with American Light. It doesn't feel authentic. It feels like trying to be in that moment when the moment has passed, and you shouldn't just do a pastiche about it. You should do more modern. I think you have to like find your own voice, and when you're always kind of doing pastiche, like there's no room for your own voice. So I don't know. Maybe you'd like American Light. Maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. So I'm not recommending it. That's all I'm saying. But Dino Campana as a beatnik. Again, I don't know who. You're making all these references, Lucas, to characters I don't know, but I'll have to look them up. I have to leave you, gentlemen. Oh, see you later, Lucas. It's been quite late here. It's been an interesting chat. See you. Okay. Nice to meet you, Lorenzo. P.S. Joyce definitely knew Rabelais while writing Finnegan's Wake. Okay. So maybe he knew him. I feel like he's discovered him later in life. Maybe that's what I've heard. So maybe if somebody else knows, they can let me know when Joyce exactly discovered Rabelais. I think I heard something like in Joyce's collection of books, he had a copy of Gargantua and Pantagruel, but the pages were not cut. You know how old books, you had to take one of those letter openers and cut the pages. I could be totally wrong about that. I don't claim to be an expert on anything, So yeah, if you haven't already left, Lucas, take care. Yeah, in Italy it must be pretty late. I'm in Malaysia now, so it's pretty early. It's like 11:30. So, anyways, let's get on to the final story, and at last, just to be done with silence. So, this story, and this story was pretty short and very disorienting. As I landed in this story, I had no idea what was going on, who these characters were, where I was, and slowly it emerges that this takes place um, just before 1200 AD. That's something they make clear. And I wasn't totally clear what was going on. Like there was like this punishment, like they were prisoners, I believe, and somebody was dead. I have to say, I didn't like this story. I was just, it felt like that other story, the one about the character traveling back through time. What was that called? Um, Not even Legend. It felt like the notes of a story that needed to be expanded, and yeah, as such, by the time I had finished the story, I was barely clear what was going on, and I certainly can't say it had any emotional impact on me. So maybe, sometimes you read a story and you have to read it again, like Joyce is like that. I just feel like more when he tries to do that, it's not effective and that I don't want to read it again. So I think he does his best when he does communicate the main idea of the story in the first reading. So with this one, and at last, just to be done with silence, yeah, it didn't have any effect on me, and I wasn't very happy with it. So I'm not really gonna go on about that one because I don't have anything to say. And with that, we've reached the end of the book. And just to summarize, I was not very happy with the book as a whole, but there were a few that I think a few stories that I think stood out. And I would say if you want to read the best ones, I would just say Cold Reading, which is very short, and What We Can Know About Thunderman, which is very long. Those were my favorites. And after reading this, I feel that, Moore is supposed to be starting this, I want to say series of 5 books of fantasy novels. And I think the first one's coming out in 2024, I want to say, or 2023. I don't know. It's coming out in the next few years. And at this point, after reading all this prose by Moore, I have to say that I'm not going to just run out and pick that book up, the first novel. I'm going to wait and see what kind of reviews it gets because I overall have not been that excited about Moore's recent prose since Jerusalem on. And I've overall been happier with his comics. But I'm willing to give him a chance because, he's written many things over the years of varying quality and varying styles. And I'm always curious to see what he's working on. And I'm going to check out the reviews of that novel when it comes out in a year or two. But I'm not going to, unlike this book, I'm not going to rush out and get it. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I may do at some point a live stream about From Hell. So I'll give you guys at least a month notice if you want to join me for that. Because I do remember enjoying From Hell quite a bit when I read it. But it's been many years. And I would love to read it again. It's one of his best works, I think. And Eddie Campbell does the art, great art. So maybe look forward to that. If you're not subscribed to this channel, if you just discovered this video somehow and you found it through searching for Alan Moore, then stay tuned for that. I've also done another video about Jerusalem about 6 years ago when that came out. Yeah, and got a lot of views. So yeah, Alan, you're saying, what are you returning to when am I returning to the States? You've been on quite the world tour. Good question. Yeah. So I've been traveling since August, and right now I'm in Malaysia. I'm going to be in Malaysia until February 2nd. Then I'm flying to Thailand because you can stay basically in Malaysia for 3 months if you're interested in travel information without any extension of a visa. Just show up. They actually grilled me quite a bit. They said like they wanted to see my Airbnb receipts on my phone. They wanted to see my onward ticket. So, but they did eventually let me in, a rogue like me. And I'll be here, so yeah, just under 90 days. And then I'll be in Thailand for, I don't know, I can stay 30 days, but if I extend it, I can stay 60 days. And then my main reason to be in Southeast Asia rather than Europe was to get away because I hate the winter, I hate cold. And right now I'm wearing short sleeve t-shirt and shorts, and I love the warm weather here. It's great. So yeah, so I'll be in Thailand a month, maybe 2 months, and then I haven't figured out where I'm going next. I'm probably going to go to, I'd like to go to Japan or Korea. I've been looking for a cheap ticket and I have not found one. Or I find cheap tickets that are overnight tickets, which I don't really want to do because I'd rather not lose a night's sleep and have to deal with that because my sleep schedule got messed up enough moving to, I'm still staying up to like 2 or 3 every morning, at least sometimes 3 or 4. And I don't like that. I've been trying, like I set an alarm to wake up today because I started this at 10, so I set an alarm for 9:30. So yeah, the soonest I'm probably going to be in the U.S. is going to be, you know, late spring, early summer. I do plan to come back to the U.S. at some point in 2023. So yeah, and when I land, I don't know where I'm going to land. I'm thinking maybe either Washington or Arizona. I have people and reasons to visit both. So if I go to Washington, maybe I can head down through Oregon. That'd be possible. We'll see. So if I do that, I'll let you know, Alan, and give you a heads up. And yeah, we should collaborate on some videos, talk about books. Because one thing I've discovered is that by and large, people that don't do YouTube don't want to be in videos. And Alan, you do videos all the time, so you're a pro. You're used to being on camera and whatever. So I know that I feel like you'd be cool with doing videos either on your channel, on my channel, whatever. We should do both. That's how the pros do it. They do cross on different channels. That way that you pick up each other's audience and kind of cross promote each other. So yeah, I'm totally down for doing that, and we can discuss Alan Moore, we can discuss James Joyce, we can discuss Pynchon, whatever. And you've done a lot of authors, like I said, Clarice Lispector. You've done, I believe his name's Gene Wolfe, right? You've recommended his prose, his fantasy books, and he's another author that I've been wanting to read. Yeah. Oh, cool. Down in Arizona. Yeah. I know people in Arizona, and so I don't know where I'll land. A lot of where I go is basically depending on where I can find the cheapest tickets. So yeah. It's if I come back to the States, I'd like to be in the States for at least a few months again before. I'm not planning to settle in the States at this point by any means. I guess my plan right now is to keep traveling, and I'm really trying to grow my magic channel, and it's growing. It's growing very well. It's going very well and growing at the same time. So I'm hoping to get that monetized this year and keep doing my super peer chats, and yeah, allowing me to keep growing. And at some point, I'll probably settle. I've kind of been checking out different places where I might like to live. Malaysia's been interesting. I don't know if I'd like to live here or not. I don't know. Thailand I've been to before, but it's been a long time, and I'm not sure if I would like to live there. But I'd like to visit it while it's still warm in the winter and not have to deal with winter. And then Korea, I lived in Korea before, and Japan I've been to before. But both it's been 10 years, so I'd like to visit them. And yeah, so where I end up living, I'm okay actually living like this in Airbnbs. I meet people when I can. I met people in Italy, and I'm probably going to meet people in Thailand and maybe Japan and South Korea if I visit there. So that's kind of like the biggest thing is I like to meet people where I go, and either people that I've already met online or people that I just meet. And some places it's easier than others. And yeah, so I'm cool. I actually like traveling a lot and living in each place short term. I think even if I end up settling, quote unquote, settling, I'll still plan to travel regularly because I just love it so much. And yeah, so uh, you want to immigrate to Ireland? Oh, interesting. um, Ireland is interesting. I don't know if I could deal with the winter weather, and I'm not sure how I would feel about living there. I'm curious. I mean, it's grown so much enormously in the last 15, 20 years, like since Facebook and Google are there now. They like that whole area with all the that development. Because when I first visited Ireland in 2004, I believe, it was so different. There was no Facebook. All the tech companies had not established themselves there. So yeah, I need to. Yeah, thanks for the vlogs. I don't know if that if anyone else likes my vlogs, but I enjoy doing them. I have a lot of footage from I need to upload from Italy, in Croatia, and now from Malaysia. So at some point, I'll dump all that because I visited in Italy, Milan, Genoa, Turin, and Trieste, and then in Croatia, I went to Zagreb, and then in Malaysia, I'm in Malacca right now. So at some point, I'll get off my laziness and I'll just dump all that and just narrate over it because I don't know if it's very interesting, but it's yeah. I'll put that up soon, and I say soon, but I have no idea when. And I think my voice is running out, and I should probably eat breakfast. So yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up, you guys, and anyone left watching, thank you for showing up, and that's all I have to say for now. And I guess I'll call it a wrap for the night. I always love these live streams, and when I first started doing them, people were not on at the beginning, and it dispirited me a little. But now I just like I know that the nature of the algorithm is that more people generally watch, and you have to play with the topics, and even if nobody watches, they still get views. So I love doing them, so I'm going to keep doing live streams. I think that's my format for the future. I can't remember, Alan, if you've done any live streams. If you haven't, you may want to give it a try because they're really easy to do. The software I use is called OBS. OBS. But there's plenty of other software, or you could just go live on YouTube. But with OBS, it kind of allows me to hook up this microphone and adjust the volume a little. So anyways, yeah, I'm going to call it a night, you guys, and thanks for showing up, anyone who's watched, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.